introduce himself so that we can assist him or her to or her. KB.
Babalo.
Good evening, Chairperson.
Good evening. At the chairs, it's Honorable Maswanganyi on board. What do you say?
Chairperson, I did not see them. I'm getting surprised you are here, but because we are assisting each other in terms of accepting guest chair. So if Chairperson Maswanganyi or Chairperson Karim, Chairperson Mahlangu are present, can you please speak to the chair?
I haven't seen Chairperson Maswanganyi here. However, Chairperson Karim has tendered an apology for this meeting.
Okay. I think the time it's exactly 1800 hours, and we must start. Good evening to everybody on the platform. Good evening, chairs, in case they're still trying to connect. Chairperson Standing Committee on Finance, Chairperson Select Committee on Finance, Chairperson Select Committee on Appropriations, and the honorable members from those committees. You are all welcome. Also welcome the support staff of all our committees, members of the media on the platform. Welcome the FFC, led by Dr. Mbava, and the Parliamentary Budget Office, PBO, led by Dr. Janchis. You are all welcome. Let me get from the secretaries of the committees. Let me start with the Standing Committee on Finance. Any apologies?
Good evening, Mr. Buthelezi. From Standing Committee on Finance, Honorable Phoebe Abraham and Voter Vessels tendered his apology this morning. Pretty sure that it was for this meeting as well. It's for the entire day. So it's Abraham and Vessels.
Thank you so much, Alan. Darren from Standing Committee on Appropriations. Darren. Okay, let's go to Select Committee on Appropriations.
No apologies, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you, Babalo. No apologies. Select Committee on Finance.
Good evening, Chairperson. We only received the apology from Mr. Karim. That's all.
Sorry, we didn't hear that.
From Mr. Karim, Chairperson of the Select Committee on Finance. Yes,
okay, good. Thank you so much. We are happy to start, and thank you very much, other members, for we had a long day in Parliament and we are in this committee now. I think we really welcome that and appreciate it. We have got an agenda. We'll have FFC presentation on the MTBPS, PBO, and then we'll have deliberations after that. FFC will give you maximum 30 minutes, but if you can do it lesser than that, it will be appreciated. PBO also, you'll come in after FFC, take your 30 minutes, and if you can do it in less than 30 minutes again, that will be highly appreciated. So Dr. Mbava and all the commissioners who are present, good evening and you're welcome. I'll be checking my stopwatch. You'll only bring the meeting back to me once you have finished. Dr. Mbava?
Yes, thank you, Chairperson of the committee. I was just trying to get my charger. Just my laptop is going to run out of power. Thank you so much for welcoming us to this meeting this evening. I have commissioners on the platform as well as management from the FFC. Thank you so much, Chairperson, again. We are here as the FFC to present our submission on the medium-term budget policy statement. And Chairperson, I just wish to make a quick context for my presentation. And then I want to hand over to the research team who will take you through the presentation in detail. The recent economic green shoots, exemplified by positive GDP growth in the first and second quarter of 2021, augur well as a foundation for a sustained economic recovery and a stable fiscal path. However, members, threats to economic recovery continue to mount with pre-existing structural bottlenecks that severely constrain growth. Intermittent energy supplies, unresolved corruption, poor policy making and execution culminate in the loss of confidence or increased borrowing cost for the bonds we issue as a country. South Africa must seek to avoid withdrawing its fiscal support to vulnerable citizens too early and signal to the public that its debt levels are sustainable in the long run by eliminating leakages and executing reprioritizations that are productive and constructive. Chairperson and members, the Commission agrees that the revenue windfall should not be fully committed to further expanding expenditures that have already grown far beyond our means of revenue. Instead, the revenue windfall should be used to defray as much as possible the structural budget deficit and offload the growing debt service cost with redemption requirements. National debt and state-owned enterprises remain a glaring binding constraint to growth and risk to fiscal sustainability. Debt service cost is the fastest growing expenditure line item with a 10% annual average growth rate over the 2022 MTEF, and debt service costs account for 12% of total consolidated total spending in 2021, rising to 16% in 2024-25. The detrimental effect of debt service cost crowding out social programs could lead to the total collapse of basic and social services as funds intended for core spending are diverted to servicing debt. The Commission acknowledges the difficulties in moderating debt within a subdued economic environment and recommends improvements in cost efficiencies of spending and closing the fiscal leakages to offset the growing deficit and debt. Therefore, Chairperson and members, the Commission welcomes the 2021 MTBPS tabled by the Minister of Finance, and in particular notes the government's effort to maintain a modest expenditure while making sure that core spending areas are preserved. However, the Commission remains firm on its stance that the need to exercise financial restraint to achieve fiscal prudence must not come at a net cost towards the socio-economic conditions of our people and for them to regress. And with those opening words, Chairperson, I wish to hand over to our research head who will take us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, honourable chairs and honourable members. So the presentation is quite loaded, but we shall be focusing mainly on especially the fiscal framework and looking at the macro fiscal environments and as backdrop, which this MTBPS table. Let me then hand over to Sianda to run through the other presentations in the team, please. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Tando, can you help us with sharing the presentation? Okay, while Tando is still trying to share. Tando, are you able to share?
Unfortunately, I get a message that hosts are disabled from sharing this. Okay.
It's all right, Sianda, go ahead. I'm sharing now. Go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you, Chen, and good evening to chairpersons and honorable members. So I will be taking you through the first part of the presentation and then hand over to my colleagues. Next slide. So looking at the global economic recovery, which continues, and the global economy is now projected to grow by 5.9% in 2021 and 4.9% in 2022. And we see that vaccination access has emerged as a critical driver of the economic recovery. This is despite unequal access to vaccination by countries and the pace of the rollout. Despite these good projections, the global outlook continues to face uncertainty and is still subject to various risks. The possibility of spreads of COVID-19, repeated outbreaks, which are still possible, especially considering that there are new variants that are coming up, especially in developing countries which have a slow pace of vaccination. Next slide. Also, increasing inflation is one of the points of concerns that face the recovery. So inflation is forecasted to remain elevated even going into 2022 in some emerging and developing economies. So inflation is expected to be at 4.9% in 2021 before moderating to 4% in 2022 in some of the emerging and developing economies. So there is growing concerns regarding this increase in inflation, that it may not be transitory as initially it was thought out to be, but it may be persistent in the near term. And we know that inflation has serious implications in terms of interest rates and debt servicing costs. Next slide, please. Looking on the domestic front, we see that real GDP growth has increased for the fourth consecutive quarter in a row, and it is recovering faster than expected. And we see that final consumptions by household contributed to this recovery. This also includes fixed capital formation, which also contributed to second quarter 2021, following a contraction in the first quarter. Next slide. But we also say that much as there is this global inflation concern, these concerns are also here in South Africa, because headline inflation accelerated from a low of 2.1 in May to about 5% in September 2021, although it still remains within the midpoint of the South African Reserve Bank. And some of the short-term inflation risk include the international crude oil prices and high domestic electricity and other administered prices. So we see that there is a possible interest rate hike, which can be announced by the MPC meeting on Thursday. Next slide. Looking on the employment side, we see that the recovery in employment has so far been sluggish and has yet to catch up with the recovery in general economic activity. So we see that the official rate of people who are looking for employment and able to work, that is the official unemployment, has reached a record high of 34.8%. And we see that the COVID crisis exposed long-standing structural weaknesses in South Africa's labor market. Next slide. And then next slide, we look at the fiscal outlook. We see that although in-year tax revenue collection increased, as the chairperson has already alluded to a higher than estimated collection in the 2021 budget, government expenditure still remains high for the tax base that we have. So South Africa's tax to GDP ratio for 2021 financial year stands only at 24.6%, and it is forecasted to only rebound to pre-COVID levels of 26.3 in the outer years of the MTF. And the Commission, as the chair has already alluded to, that we welcome that the revenue windfall was partially committed to addressing, to servicing debt, and also to some social and economic expenditure. Next slide. What we see is that the main budget revenue and expenditure gap narrowed towards an envisaged primary balance, which will be in 2024 and 25 fiscal year. But it is important to note that this narrowing of the budget deficit was despite the fact that there was personal income tax relief, which were instituted to support households. And we say here, the Commission is of the view that the government should continue to focus on growing the tax base rather than focusing on hiking tax rates. Next slide. And as part of the recommendation, we say we support the economic reforms that have been instituted and continue to be implemented in trying to improve competitiveness and lowering barriers of entry. We also say that, like the chairperson has already alluded to, that financial restraints to achieve financial fiscal prudence should not be at the cost of socio-economic conditions of our people. We also say as the Commission that we support the amendments in the tax law amendments bill as important in trying to combat the impact that COVID-19 has had. Next slide. I'll hand over to Tando to continue with the presentation from this point.
Thank you, Sianda. Good afternoon, Chairperson and honorable members. So I will start off with the 2021 Adjustment Appropriation Bill. So what we note here is that there are a number of adjustments that have been made by the 2021 Adjustment Appropriation Bill to the 2021 Appropriation Bill. The first set of adjustment came in through the second Special Appropriation Bill in August this year, amounting to an additional spending of 32.85 billion. It was triggered mainly by the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the July civic unrest. And what is also important to note here is the fact that 80% of the adjustment provided funding for the extension of the social relief of distress grant, which amounted to 26.7 billion. So in terms of the second set of adjustment, they relate to 4 categories of expenditure. So firstly, additional funding was allocated to cover the cost of an increase in the wage bill resulting from the public service wage agreement, amounting to an additional 20.5 billion. A large fraction of this funding was allocated to provinces. Secondly, the second phase of the presidential initiative on youth employment was allocated 11.2 billion. And then thirdly, there was support for DENEL to meet its financial obligations to the tune of 2.9 billion. Lastly, funding was allocated to the procurement of vaccines, which amounted to 2.3 billion. Next slide. So what we note here is that the estimates of direct charges against the National Revenue Fund were adjusted by approximately 42 billion to cater for the increased provincial equitable share resulting from the wage bill increases, as we've already alluded to in the previous slide. So with regards to the votes, our analysis show that the vote appropriations were adjusted by approximately 15 billion to cater mostly for the second phase of the presidential youth employment intervention. So in terms just of the highlights of the breakdown, what we see is that unavoidable expenditure amounted to 102.6 million, whereas rollovers amounted to 2.8 billion, and then declared unspent funds amounted to 2 billion. So what is important to note here is that these adjustments were offset through the drawing down of the Contingency Reserve Fund by 9 billion, and also not assigning infrastructure funds to votes provided 4 billion, and then projects that underspent were projected to provide 3.7 billion. So in our final analysis, what we see is that the total adjustment will increase estimated spending for 2021-22 by 59.9 billion, and non-interest spending is estimated to be increased by 59.4 billion. Next slide. So in terms of the recommendation, the Commission views the wage increases and the procurement of vaccines as necessary. However, the support for Denel should be viewed in the context of the pressing need to restructure SOEs, without which these entities will continue to drain the fiscus. The Commission is also of the view that the finalization of the public sector remuneration strategy is critical because it will provide guidance on the sustainability of the public sector wage bill. And then the Commission also supports the implementation of the phase 2 of the Presidential Employment Initiative for youth because of its potential to alleviate youth unemployment. Next slide. So now when we look at the provincial allocation, with regards to provincial allocations, our analysis showed that there was a nominal increase of 3% in the 2021 MTBPS in comparison with the 2021 budget. This translates to an increase of 20 billion. In terms of the growth rate for the provincial equitable share is forecasted to marginally decelerate in 2022-23 and also 2023-24. And similarly, the growth rate for conditional grants is also expected to stagnate over this period. So the Commission reiterates its previous recommendation to moderate expenditure subject to a detailed explanation by affected departments on how service delivery will be preserved. Next slide. So this slide is just a numerical depiction of the narrative in the previous slide. It essentially highlights the decrease of the provincial equitable share from 545 billion in 2021-22 to 525 billion in 2023-24. And then we see that there is an increase to 549 billion in 2024-25. Similarly, what we note from these slides as highlighted is that the total provincial allocation declined from 661 billion in 2021-22 to 647 billion in 2023-24. And then there is that increase to 676 billion in 2024-25. I'll at this point hand over to my colleague, Dr. Mkhululi, to continue.
Thank you, Thando. I'm going to take the members through the local government section of the slides. That slide you are seeing there are two messages from this particular slide. That the MTBPS was actually presented shortly after the tightly contested municipal elections, whereby 31% of those contested municipalities were hung councils. And this has some implications, and we have seen it in the 2016 elections that some of these hung elections, they were actually service delivery challenges. So on that one, the Commission implores coalition councils to shun political bickering and place people at the center of their decision making. And the other aspect is that municipalities still face some uncertainties around the COVID crisis. And as a result, we know that many of them are on their recovery path. The Commission encourages municipalities to challenge the traditional way of doing things and focus on maximizing efficiencies and pursuing policies that leave no one behind. Next slide. On this particular slide, we look at the allocations to the local government. We know that the sector has been allocated a total of 450 billion over the MTF, but more important is what is contained in the next slide. The figures there on the allocations, we see that the bottom panel there, the local government sector over the MTF, the allocations, they'll decline by 0.1% over the MTF, and the equitable share by minus 0.4, and the general fuel levy by that margin as well. So what this means is that the poor really now, especially in the year 23-24, will be sharing part of the impact of the fiscal consolidation process. We see the effect of the allocations declining in the year 23-24, which is very, very severe there. So that's what the next few slides simply show. That slide simply shows the local government equitable share in real terms, that the Commission is concerned that the poor and vulnerable will not be protected over the MTF, and the progressive realization of basic rights is at risk over the MTF. Next slide. And on that slide, we show the conditional grants. Again, the Commission notes with concern the slow growth and negative growth in conditional grant over the MTF, which may actually impact negatively on service delivery, but also it may actually affect the recovery process of the local government sector. Then I look at the conclusion, next slide, or recommendations. Those are the recommendations for provinces. The Commission is recommending that expenditure moderation must be followed by comprehensive reports from the affected government departments. We see some moderation in expenditures in different departments or even in provinces. So we're saying there must be reports tabled in Parliament indicating how these departments will manage tighter budgets and how they will cushion delivery of essential social services. Then secondly, the Commission is concerned about the reduction in the PS and the impact of that reduction on service delivery. On the local government sphere, the Commission implores coalition government to actually place decision. We know that there will be a number of coalitions, and the Commission is saying there's a need to place people at the center of their decision making. And also the government should set in motion programs and resources to capacitate new councillors. We know that there will be new councillors who will be making decisions, so there's a need to capacitate those new councillors. And finally, the Commission recommends the government to protect the local government equitable share, because its continuous decline will compromise gains which have been achieved so far, especially on the progressive realization of basic rights. Tando.
Thank you, Mkululi. I shall be just fast forwarding the rest of the presentation. Basically, honorable chair members, we have here for you in terms of our fiscal risk and our own reading of the need to implement this debt management as it is also quite repeated, emphasized in our opening, as well as our contingency liabilities is still a huge burden on our fiscus. Of course, the risk indeed, especially on our exposures, on the need for supporting some of these very financially precarious SOEs going forward. Compensation of employees as well. We see this slow decline or that was emphasized recently. However, if one really digs into the details of the numbers, both salary as well as headcounts have continuously been increasing. And that is just how the evidence is presented in itself. So here we note the recent sort of slight moderation, but in the broader scheme of things, it's still could potentially become a fiscal risk on the framework. And so those are those two sections summarized, condensed. Thank you, Chairperson. Let me hand back over to you. And we're keeping in time.
Thank you very much on time. Thank you very much, Dr. Mbava and your team. Dr. Janchis and your team, you have got 30 minutes maximum. It would be appreciated if you can follow the example set by FFC. Okay, let's go.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Good evening, Chairperson. Good afternoon. Good evening, honorable members. I'm trying to load my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity. I can't load. All right. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Chairperson. I think, okay, all right.
Sorry, just to say that I'm sharing the screen, Dr. Janchis. It's Siraj. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Thank you so much. Good evening, Chairperson and honorable members. Thank you so much for the opportunity for Parliamentary Budget Office to brief the committees on the medium-term budget policy for this year. I'm with the team on the platform. I'll give a quick background context for our presentation, and the team will take you through the nitty-gritties. My way of time will try to really narrow down to giving time, although I must admit we might skip by a few minutes there. Siraj, can you just quickly move to the background of the slides? This is a presentation outline. And these are some of the introduction, just to show what are some of the requirements by the Act, how matters to be considered by Parliament in looking at the proposals in the MTBPS in this regard. I think, Chair, the context to our presentation really, we look at in a way that the MTBPS continue, the COVID-19 pandemic continues, as we've seen, and really the point we're raising here is that the health and social economic issues, in fact, will continue to unfold over the medium term. And as we've seen, that the fourth wave of infections is currently affecting many countries, particularly we've seen high rates in Europe, even though in those countries there's high vaccination rate, which really shows that in terms of the minister's comments last week, which recognized that South Africa in a way will be hit by the fourth wave within the festive season. This really, Chair and honorable members, create even more uncertainties with regards to the focus proposed in the medium term in this regard. But also we try to provide the narrative that there is certainly a global consensus that the public sector action in the form of monetary and fiscal stimulus remain important in trying to keep the global economy and domestic economies going on or to avoid a collapse. But I think what we're trying to highlight here that we see that regardless of the context, we see the MTBPS proposes even further tougher fiscal consolidations, which in a real term we see lowering of social expenditure over the medium term, which is a point that we want to raise as a worrying factor in this regard. And next slide. And really, what we've seen as well, we've seen that the efficiencies and some of the plans around effectiveness and influence by government on key plans have been poor over the time when we do our review, and some of the targets, as Honorable Mlenza has noted in the morning, are unlikely to be met over time, which raises concerns in terms of the proposals in the MTBPS in this regard. We also emphasize the importance that the supply side structural reforms are unlikely to have an impact adequate to enhance growth without taking into account the importance of the stimulating demand in the economy in this regard. But also see that the revenue collections has also been better than expected, which really has improved the fiscal framework over the short term in this regard. And I think the main point message we're also trying to put out there as a context of our discussions really, it's a question where the relief and recovery for the poor households and business will come from, where will that come from? It's an important question that the MTBPS doesn't seem to answer. It leaves it unanswered. And we've continued to raise the concerns as this affects the credibility of the fiscal framework going forward. In the context, Chairperson, members, I'll give the team to deal with the nitty-gritty, and I'll come down at the end to just narrow it down, bring it down to close. Dr. Orlandi can just take it through. Thank you so much, Chair and members.
Thank you, Director, and good evening, honorable members and guests. I will take you through the policy section. Next slide. So members, this slide provides a very high-level summary of the biannual progress report on the 2019-2024 medium-term strategic framework compiled by the DPME at the end of March 2021. We are showing you these results so that you can also judge whether the MTBPS respond to these matters raised and if specific financial decisions taken are in line with the needs identified. I won't go through all the bullet points, but members, in terms of education and skills, the proxy for quality education is tracked through the number of learners achieving 60% and above in maths and science in grade 12. The 2020 results reflected rates of only 13.2% and 15.3% respectively in these two subjects. Research has also shown that it may take a number of years to recover from the resultant loss of learning due to COVID-19. If the country chooses not to do anything drastically, recovery will be achieved only in 2032. Members, the child under 5 severe acute malnutrition case fatality rate was 7.1% during the period October 2020 to March 2021, while the medium-term strategic framework is under 5% by 2024. According to the biannual report, only about 10% of land has been transferred to Black owners since 1994, and reasons given is it is due to the lack of funds and high levels of corruption and inefficiencies. The Department of Human Settlements Housing Needs database also shows that over 1.7 million households are located in formal settlements, and the slow pace of upgrading these settlements prolong the harsh living conditions experienced by these communities. Next slide. Members, in comparing the policy direction as provided by the President for the 2022 medium-term expenditure framework, it's clear that the 2021 MTBPS is making an effort to accelerate reforms, but what is missing is the priority to fight corruption, strengthen the state, and the implementation of efficiency measures, such as the review of the macro structure of government and the reduction of smaller entities, which was investigated by the Treasury, implemented. So basically that is missing in the MTBPS, and it requires feedback from the project that the Treasury started. Next slide. So members, we found the spending priorities being considered for the 2022 MTEF period as reflected by departments in the different function groups as very incoherent. According to basic education, more policy decisions need to bring compensation spending in line with available resources. And according to the DMPE, as we said, drastic steps are actually required to recover from the resultant loss of learning due to COVID-19. So should this not be the main priority then for education? In terms of health, discussions are underway on how to respond to future waves of COVID-19 infections and continue the vaccination program in 2022-23, including for younger groups and with booster doses if necessary. This is what the department is saying. The COVID-19 component of the HIV, TB, malaria and community outreach grant, however, already provided 900 million for 2022-23, and further requirements for allocation should be mainstreamed in this conditional grant. Spending pressures associated with absorbing the large cohort of medical graduates, leading internships and community services posts are being considered. And this is what the department is saying. But is this the result of cutting COE budgets and personnel numbers? The department also indicated that infrastructure allocations will be delayed and allocated in future in line with revised cash flow projections. Clarity needs to be provided on this, members, from the Department of Health. Or does this mean that the health facility revitalization grants that have been allocated in the previous MTEF will be reduced? We don't know. Social development will research possible new social support options once the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant ends in March 2022. And then in terms of the community development function, national departments are now expected to improve monitoring and regulatory compliance through periodic reporting and building capacity. This is of great concern, members, specifically if it means that this has not been done in the past. In terms of the general public service, the DPSA will continue reviewing personnel spending to reduce sustainable growth in the wage bill. No mention is made of the possible review of the macro structure or the exercise initiated by the Treasury in terms of the possible inclusion of small public entities into departmental programs. Next slide. Members, reprioritization is the most popular activity in the Economic Development and Peace and Security Function Group of the MTEF. The Department of Tourism reprioritized funds to support short-term public jobs in the tourism sector and transform the sector through the rollout of the Tourism Equity Fund. It is not clear why reprioritizing funds if other funds were allocated for job creation in the tourism industry. The Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment has reprioritized funds for South African Weather Service. The department also reprioritized funds to support operations and address the budget shortfall of South African national parks. The Peace and Security Function Group will reprioritize funds to enhance capacity in institutions, combating crime and corruption, and upgrade information and community technology infrastructure for greater efficiency. Additional funds of 1.8 billion were provided in the 21-22 budgets for this purpose. No indication of progress has been given, but the function already plans to reprioritize further over the MTEF to upgrade information and communication systems. And again, over the next few years, the Department of Defense will also reprioritize funds to set up a rapid response unit. So the question is, from where are these departments reprioritizing, and will spending still be effective? Next slide. Members from the Consolidated Expenditure per Function Group, the diagram shows that the proportions allocated to most of the function groups are declining over the medium term. Except for an increasing trend in funding for community development, the Community Development Group, despite the underspending outcomes in the previous 3 financial years. And the Economic Development Function Group shows an estimated increase in the proportion of the consolidated spending from 9.7% in 2021-22 to 10.8% in 2024-25. The increase is specifically linked to funding for economic regulation and infrastructure. Next slide. So in terms of the proportions of the consolidated expenditure allocated per economic classification, the diagram shows that the proportions increase for current payments. So this is due to the increase in the estimated proportion to be spent on interest and rent on land. The revised spending on CO in the current financial year decreased to 31.3% from the 32.2% outcome in 2021 and is estimated to increase to 32.1% in 2022-23. This increase might be linked to the short-term jobs that are created through the presidential employment stimulus. Over the medium term, the proportion spent on COE is estimated to decrease to 30.6% of total spending in 2024-25. The peak in 2021 and 2021-22 in transfers and subsidies are due to the increase in the transfers to households, which includes the social relief of distress grants. Payments for capital assets is estimated to grow to 5% of total expenditure in 2024-25. Next slide. So members, the question we are asking is asking is how much longer does government need to show efficiency and effectiveness? Long and medium-term policy priorities, including the proposals for COVID-19 recovery, includes the NDP, the 7 priorities of the medium-term strategic framework, the presidential employment stimulus, and the economic reconstruction and recovery plan. The district development plan aims to build capacity for improving planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation over a longer period. And analysis of progress made with implementation of all these plans shows that in most instances, government is unlikely to achieve most of the targets that have been set. Government's actions to address the slow implementation have mainly been reprioritizing budgets in the short term, but is this in line with government's longer term plan, or is it time to change the direction? And lastly, members, just to provide you with a snapshot of what the 2021 MTBPS actually suggests. Departments were refunded for current COE budgets that were reprioritized in the 2021 budget by allocating funds provided for infrastructure, part of the contingency reserve, and other provisional allocations. It suggests to import skills while cutting on personnel numbers. It continues to only focus on COE for cost containment, with health services and the provision of education and protection services are under pressure. In fact, 80% of education is spent on COE in provincial governments. What other options does government have and should consider to contain costs? Government continues with the Presidential Employment Initiative, which is a duplication of other employment initiatives, and despite rollovers from last year that were not spent. Funds are also allocated for infrastructure spending from this initiative. Therefore, members, it should be realized that not all these funds are directly linked to jobs. It also provides for livelihood support, capacity building to catalyze growth and job creation. The MTBPS also suggests the reduction of the allocation to pay for financial assets, therefore allocations for or to support SOEs. But government created an unallocated reserve in addition to the contingency reserve of 73.2 billion over the medium term. It suggests to grow the community development function by 5.5%, while this function is not performing and shows historic underspending. The 2021 MTBPS continues to grow funding for conditional grants, which are administered poorly and not performing. At least the community development function identified the need for national departments to improve monitoring and regulatory compliance through periodic reporting and building capacity. Thank you, members, and I'll hand over to my colleague, Siraj.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelia. Honorable Chair and members, I'll take you through the section on macroeconomic overview and risks to growth and development. So what we're seeing in the rest of the world, that there's a large concern with increasing resilience within society and pressure to maintain stability, to reduce inequality, to provide poor households with support. And yet we're seeing that the 2021 MTBPS seems concerned mainly with fiscal stability in a fairly narrow sense. And you know, we talk in our pre-MTBPS brief that we sent to hopefully all members have seen it. We talk about externalities. And so government can talk about, you know, how much debt service costs increasing and what it is as a percentage of GDP, but they actually aren't looking at what is not, what they don't measure and what the numbers they don't put out. And that is about the damage related to continued high levels of unemployment, high levels of poverty, extreme levels of inequality within South African society. And those have direct costs to the fiscus. They also have indirect costs, and they also have costs to the future of our children, their health, and as we saw, and my colleague Nelia pointed out from the midterm MTSF report in terms of education and the health of children. And we're seeing, for instance, in the second bullet point, I talk about that again. What are the developmental, physical, and mental health effects of malnutrition, stunting, and other consequences of poverty and inequality on the fiscus directly, but also on future economic growth and development. And we see that South Africa has a 27% rate of stunting of children. And this has been like that since 1997. It's been more than a quarter of children over that long a period. And that isn't actually measured. And when we talk about having to deal with high levels of debt and risk and the cost of debt, we're not measuring those things and its impact on the fiscus and how much government spending on those things and how those things are becoming expenditures made less effective by actually not putting more money into and supporting poor households. The first bullet point that I have there under what's not mentioned in the fiscal risk statement in the MTBPS is a recurrence of the type of damage incurred in July 2021. And given the turnout in the local government elections, one wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow we saw similar kinds of damage due to social unrest in almost any part of the country at the moment. And so we're not actually taking, so this narrow view on fiscal stability and sort of this supply side structural reform approach to business confidence is not adequate and is not taking into account the situation in South Africa. It's not taking into account its people, and it's not taking into account the damage to society and its economic development chances, prospects, and the direct and indirect costs of the fiscus. I won't go through all the other bullet points under risks that's not mentioned, but these are important and they are quite related. But given time, I won't go on to that. Just to say that the appendix fails to mention the high risks associated with social, political, and economic unrest and instability due to unbelievably high levels of inequality in South Africa. In our pre-NTBS brief that, again, hopefully you've seen, we actually show graphs of how we talk about South Africa as one of the most unequal societies in the world, but South Africa is actually an outlier amongst the most unequal societies in the world. In terms of, and also that goes for unemployment. We are unbelievably high, and it's time that we started saying unbelievably high rather than amongst the highest, I believe. So we're not looking at the consequences of this extraordinary high levels of poverty and inequality and unemployment in South African society, business confidence, and the prospects for short-term growth and long-term development. And so this focus on a narrow view of what fiscal stability is without taking these things into account, we believe is damaging. And recently there was an article in the media that said by a prominent person from the financial sector and a prominent international financial person who said that the problem in South Africa is not debt, it's growth. And I think we really need to consider that, but within this context. Therefore, government's approach to fiscal policy and risk has to take into account that public finances should support stability, resilience, and economic development. And yet that also means the stability and resilience of households, especially the poorest households. In terms of economic growth and development, the 2021 MTBPS says in South Africa, policy uncertainty and the slow implementation of structural reforms continue to weigh on business confidence and investment. Now, we point out that the PBO's 2019 presentation on the MTBPS already raised serious concerns about the potential effectiveness of the structural reforms. We said that the experience with the NDP provides an indication of poor performance, and I think this biannual review of the MTSF performance goes into that. So I don't have to go into those problems again. My colleague Neela covered them quite well. But given poor global demand, given South Africa's demand, and even with now recovery from the crisis in some countries, the pandemic, we're not sure if that's going to be sustained, but also it's going to take a long time to get back to where we were. So we can't be too optimistic about the recoveries we're seeing now in the short term. And so we're still seeing a huge impact on aggregate demand and a need not to focus not only on the supply side. And this is a major weakness of the structural reforms, and it's also something that's going to constrain success of the structural reforms. And even if they are successful, it's going to limit the ability of it to impact on growth and development in the economy. Also, the high levels of inequality that I've been harping on leads to distrust within South Africa across stakeholders, and that affects ability to get agreement on all the things that we want to do with the structural reforms. So the 2021 MTBPS lacks evidence or commitment that a narrow focus on supply-side structural reforms will not exacerbate the severe structural problems of the economy. And it's important that we think about structural problems, not only from supply side, but also from the demand side of the economy. So the question is then, where will relief and growth come from? The approach by government to growth and development has to take into account the global consensus on the importance of the state in the economy, especially during a crisis. It is insufficient to rely on supply-side structural reforms to grow the economy while ignoring low aggregate demand and instability of household finances. The country suffers from a severe demand problem that will be exacerbated by inadequate increases in the social wages proposed in the 21 MTBPS. So the government's saying that the social wage expenditure is 60%, and that wants to give the impression that they're doing more and that's enough. But the problem is it's about how much more we're spending, because the problems are really big and we're actually seeing poor performance on all the targets. So the social wage declines in real terms over the medium term, and real per capita expenditure or on other social wage areas declines as well. The lack of an announcement on the extension of the relief of social distress grant creates uncertainty and adds to the insecurity of millions of households. Access to services is unequal between formal and informal settlements and rich and poor and rural urban households. Additional expenditure additional expenditure on services is required to reduce the inequality of access to the quality, to access and quality of services. The social security system is not comprehensive and excludes millions of people affected by extraordinary levels of structural unemployment and the working poor. A considered basic income grant, we believe, will support the kind of growth the economy requires. It will increase stability of households and reduce poverty and inequality. That could help shift the growth path towards producing labor-intensive and less energy and capital-intensive manufactured goods and related services to meet the demand for the poor. It could actually lead us to the kind of economic structural change we require. I'm going to skip my last graph because of time, and this just deals with the short and medium term, and my colleague, Rashad, will continue with the revised fiscal framework and the debt outlook. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have, unfortunately, 4 minutes left to cover about 10 slides, but I'll just summarize the key messages from the following slides. The graphs in front of you are showing you the importance of growth.
We can give you five more minutes to finish everything.
Thank you, Chairperson. The graphs in front of you essentially show the importance, underscore the importance of higher economic growth for stabilization of fiscal metrics. It's showing you comparing what was presented in last year's MTBPS, this year's budget, and this year's MTBPS, and it shows an improvement. This improvement was made possible because of a higher growth this year. However, it's important to note that this growth is because of cyclical factors. It doesn't indicate higher trend growth, and it's very important to bear that in mind. Next slide, please. This slide shows you the key fiscal metrics or key fiscal totals from this year's MTBPS, comparing it with the previous MTBPS and the budget from this year. Here is the increased revenue, and despite government continuing with fiscal objective of consolidation over the medium term, there is a modest increase in non-interest expenditure over the medium term. Why this is important? Because this is a departure from the recent trend of there being year-on-year reductions to the of expenditure. This made possible because of this year's stronger growth, stronger revenue growth as well, but also a more buoyant outlook compared to previous budgets and compared to previous growth estimates over the medium term. And despite holding policy of fiscal consolidation, there's a modest increase in expenditure, and I think that's important to note as a point of departure. This allows for debt service costs to decrease marginally over the medium term, despite debt increasing over the medium term, albeit at a slower rate. And we're still, unfortunately, in running large structural deficits over the medium term, but it is an improvement compared to the previous estimates. Next slide, please. Honorable Chairperson, what the slide attempts to show is the costs of fiscal consolidation using a very crude metric, that is the annual real change in per capita expenditure by function. Government referred to the fiscal consolidation tunnel. It's important to note that the cost affected on society through year-on-year reductions in real terms and in per capita terms has been high for society. It has adversely affected service delivery. It has adversely affected society as a whole. The lines on this graphs beneath the horizontal black line show reductions year on year. And for many important functions like health, like peace and security, like learning and culture, which includes education, there have been reductions. And government has admitted this, for example, noting that class sizes relative to teachers have increased over the medium term. Why this is important to note over here is it presents a fiscal risk. If government's policy of fiscal consolidation does not end by 24-25 over the last year of the current MTEF, it means a continuation of this policy, and this has been a high cost that society has to bear for the sake of achieving this fiscal policy objective. Next slide, please. Chair, we have very little time left, so I'm just going to make a few key points over here. One is with respect to the credibility of the fiscal outlook. We have successive years of fiscal slippage. That is what we estimate in terms of growth in revenue, generally disappoints with the exception of this year. There are two positives that have come out of this particular MTBPS. One is very modest economic growth forecast, and very importantly over here, it's important to note is revenue buoyancies are quite modest, and that mitigates some of the risk from fiscal slippage. I've noted that if consolidation continues, there's an anticipated at least it's anticipated for 3 years' time. But if it continues, we continue kicking the primary surplus target into the next budget and the next MTBPS, that has an impact on service delivery. Very important, and it was important that the head of the DDG of the Budget Office from Treasury noted this morning that there needs to be more transparency and more comprehensive costing and impact analysis of new policies. And so this particular budget doesn't make any commitments over the medium term with respect to baseline expenditure. And I think that's quite important. And going forward, we'd like to see more considered proposals that look at the long-term effects of expenditure that forms part of your baseline. I'm now going to hand over and skip the next 4 slides for the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Chairperson, just to note it down, I think what we're really trying to emphasize is the context from which the MTBPS has been set out as the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the negative effects that will unfold over time, because we've seen that globally, even in South Africa, really the recovery is really reliant heavily on the implementation of the vaccination program, and how far that affects the recovery in the economy. We've also seen the importance that we need to be aware of the likely effect of 4th wave, as the Minister of Health noted, that might hit us in the festive season. Therefore, the likelihood of the 4th wave creates really more uncertainties with regards to the focus set out in the medium-term budget policy statement. And we emphasize that really the medium-term framework really has to be seen within the lens of the set out objectives in transforming our society and the economy. And we've seen that the progress so far shows that we're lagging behind in really transforming the economy and getting some of the socio-economic challenges realized in this regard. There has really been, when you look at the progress in the implementation of the policies, really there are some acknowledgements, some of these targets are unlikely to be realized. So the progress is being made. Therefore, as I emphasize, the importance that when we look at the proposals in the midterm budget, it has to be within the lens of what are some of the key priorities to be realized in the medium term. And it's important to take it into account how far are the proposals likely to ensure we realize developmental indicators in this regard. There's a consistency between the midterm policy and other policies within this current year with regards to the economic recovery. However, the previous slides let us know that, please, the importance that it's important to realize that the structural reform requires government expenditure which is necessary to really crowd in investment within the economy. The last slide. It is also important, Chairperson and members, that the reduction in head counts and portion of budget allocated for compensation needs to be really taken into account the needs for the state to be able to realize some of these challenges in that regard. The current global consensus about the need to increase resilience in the economy is very important. As this is important, our consensus is that the MTBPS focus largely on focusing on fiscal without really taking into account the broader stability within the society and the economy. The proposals in the MTBPS lacks evidence to show that these proposals of narrow focus on the structural reform will not accelerate the structural changes we have in the society. We've seen the improvement in the revenue outlook is very important, also improves the fiscal framework outlook. Therefore, government should also support recovery and rebuild the economy in a way that increase the demand in the economy as we try to build the stability in the household as well. The measures to support household could form part of the strategy for structural economic transformation that depends diversity and productivity based on the economy. Overall, Chairperson members, the approach government to public finance has to really look at broadly within the consensus that the importance of state in the economy and particularly dealing with the crisis and really not necessarily looking at the budget as the end itself to the means, but as a vehicle to get us to the means. Chairperson and members, thank you so much for the opportunity. We'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Janchis and your team, Dr. Mbava and your team. All members, I presented to you both presentations, and you are free to ask questions from any of the two organizations which have made presentations to us, as long as you just indicate that who are you directing the question to, is either PBO or FFC. Lubabalo, you'll help me with the honorable members who would like to have a bite on the presentations, and there is Honorable Mahlang on the platform. She was struggling to connect when we started. Welcome, Honorable Mahlangu, Chairperson of the Select Committee on Appropriations. Honorable members, please indicate. I'll just take down your names, then we'll see how many of us, and then we'll take it from there. Let's hear. Yes, is that Baban?
Yes, Chairperson. We have 4 hands up, Chair.
Yeah.
Honorable Dutoit.
Honorable Dutoit, yes.
Honorable Moletsane.
Honorable Moletsane.
Honorable Ryder.
Honorable Ryder.
Honorable Okamp.
Honorable Okamp.
Honorable Kais.
Honorable Kais.
That's 5, Chairperson. Thank you. Over to you, Chair.
Honorable Matafa can also be noted, Chair. Thank you.
Honorable Matafa, thank you. Honorable members, I don't want to limit you with time, but please consider that they must still respond to our questions. So be very much economic with your questions. I'll start with Honorable Dutoit. Honorable Dutoit, please come in.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, honorable members. Honorable Chair, first to the FFC, I'd like to find out what is their view with regards to the fiscal cliff? How far are we over the cliff? If they can just elaborate on that. And then to PBO, I want to appreciate their presentation as well. I think it's important, the factors that they mentioned, that we must look at. Earlier in this morning session, it was said that the Treasury is looking at certain factors like expected fourth wave that must be coming out and try to factor that in to the equations and the planning that they do. But it's evident that something like that fourth wave might hit us. I want to know from PBO, what is their view? Has enough been done in this budget to mitigate that, should that happen? And also the fact that they mentioned that the possibility for further social unrest is there. Should that happen, according to them, how will South Africa and the economy be able to address that matter, and will we survive that financially? Referring to or looking at the high unemployment rates at this stage, and the fact that the country's debt level is so high, and the mere fact that unemployment is at an all-time high, and the economy just cannot afford any more instances like that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Tutoit. Honorable Letsane, please come in.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me appreciate the two presentations that were presented in front of us this evening. It has come to my attention that the FFC is recommending the review of the structure of a division of revenue. My question is to PBO. I just want to know from the PBO, what is their view or their position on the structure of distribution model of the division of revenue? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Letsane. Honorable Writer, please come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, forgive me, I'm not going to appreciate the presentations because, yeah, I think both of them are a little bit shallow, Chairperson. I think that they're not getting really into the meat. Both of them are acknowledging, and I mean, we must all acknowledge that the Minister of Finance has very little wiggle room to work in at the moment. But I don't think that there's very much of a big challenge going on. And I mean, I pointed out the issues of the wage bill in this morning's session. The response we got from Treasury was, well, you know what, they can't tell the unions what to do, and they're not the ones that negotiate with the unions. Well, I can tell you what, in my house, my wife holds the purse strings, like Treasury holds the purse strings in this house that we sit in. And she tells me what I can go out and negotiate with. So, you know, I think that the wage bill is the elephant in the room that neither presentation has really addressed. I do want to appreciate the fact that the FFC took the time to submit both a documentary analysis and also put into a presentation. And I do want to just mention to PBO that they should go and Google the phrase "death by PowerPoint" and just have a look and see. I really think that there's space to adapt your presentations a little bit to what we're doing today, and maybe submit a supporting document in the background. But that really is just a stylistic comment, Chair. I think that what so Mr. Mohammed, I think, was the one that raised a few issues around the risk, and it's, again, something the FFC didn't point to and didn't get to, is the risks going forward. They touched very lightly on them, but I don't think that anyone has addressed them. And Mr. Mohammed spoke about, as he always does, about the risk of inequality and social inequality and so on. But I think that everyone's ignoring the political risk. So what gave rise to the July 2021 insurrection that we lived through? That was not an isolated incident. One hopes it was. But, you know, in terms of what led up to that, I think that we're going to find similar circumstances happening again in the fairly, you know, soon future. It's not too far distant that we're going to be experiencing very similar issues that are, you know, what was used as an excuse for the July insurrection. Add to that the outcomes of the recent local government election. I think that the political risk in this country is mounting substantially. Neither presentation has addressed that, and I know that there was a very short comment about the contingency fund, but the fact that we are allocating much lower amounts to the contingency funds in the coming years to what we used to allocate to that contingency fund. The fact is that we've used it several times recently when we've needed to bail out SOEs. Well, we've had the promise that SOEs are not going to be bailed out any longer. But the fact is that there are other matters that contingency fund is supposed to be there to take care of. In fact, matters that are more suited to contingency fund taken care of. And those matters are very likely in most scenarios that futurists are looking at to come about. And we're not going to have the resources. So, you know, we're coming in now, and Sasria doing a great job historically. They have been absolutely overwhelmed by the claims that they've faced recently. Is that a one-off event? I certainly hope so, but I don't see it happening. What happens if we sit in a situation in a year's time or 8 months' time where we don't have a tax collection windfall, where we don't have any money left in that contingency reserve because there's insufficient being allocated to that? So I think that there's insufficient emphasis being placed on the risks, certainly the political risks, but also other risks that we're facing at the moment. We've seen the fuel price increasing quite dramatically. And of course, the cost of energy therefore going up, and Eskom not being able to generate sufficient electricity on the other side of the energy circle. So, you know, how much of a risk does that pose to us? We've had certain analysts talking to us about a total blackout situation, cascading blackouts from Eskom, you know, which will leave the country in total darkness for, well, depending on who you believe when you do the reading, between 10 days and 4 weeks. But, you know, these are the risks that we really need to be looking at. And I don't believe that Treasury has done sufficient in terms of this fiscal framework, certainly, but also in terms of the medium-term forecasting to indicate exactly what they are planning to do. The wage bill, Chair, I'm going to go back to it. We sit with a problem, and it's the elephant in the room, and there's not enough being spoken about it by any of the players that we see before us today. So I think that as a result of that, the FFC and PBO need to go back to their slides, their second slide, which defines what they do, and just remind themselves of that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ryder. I hope my wife was not listening to this or is not listening to this session. She said I had other MPs, they've got the other treasuries, so please give.
It's the same in every household, Chair, don't pretend.
Isandla ngaphansi.
Welcome. Honorable Mahlangu, welcome. I see you, thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. I can just on that note mention that in my house, the Minister of Finance will not resign. She will refuse to. She was there for all eternity. So yeah, it's not like in government. Honorable Chairperson, thank you for the opportunity. The one advantage of speaking after Honorable Ryder is that you have been covered mostly. I think, as he called it rightly, the elephant in the room is the public wage bill. It's growing, we all know, and well, let's touch on the political issues of that. We know why the public wage bill is growing. We know what cadre deployment has done. We know exactly what the sorrow consequences of that is. But still, nothing is done about that. And I think that the red lights has gone on in the past. Warnings have been given, but it seems that nobody is listening to that. And we would expect then the FFC to speak to government and to say to government exactly what the risks are of continuing on this path of cadre deployment, of having a totally bloated public service sector where a huge amount of money is spent on inefficient people. That's a statement from my side. One other thing with regards to FFC, what is very worrying as well is currently our debt service cost standing at around about 12%, and that is to increase to about 16% in the 24-25 year. Now, we know, and our Minister Gonongwana said this in his speech, that it is higher than our security and our medical finances that we've got available in our budget. What are we going to do? And I know that it is the minister that spoke about it, but how are government being advised on how to lower that debt service cost? If it is going to increase and increase the whole time, we will not be able to turn this around. And we need to get proper policies in place that will assist us not to go into measures that will allow us to increase our debt continuously. And here we can come in with regards to the bailing out of state-owned enterprises. We know that it has been said that it will not be done, but unfortunately it has been said in the past as well. Then a few months later, we know that we heard that guarantees had to be paid out or bailouts just took place. So we unfortunately cannot take government on its word all the time when it comes to the promises that they've made. And we know that those promises, the breaking thereof, led to us having this incredibly high debt service cost that we've got to carry. So we need to advise government on that so that we really can have a commitment to stay at the commitments and to see that we never do that payment of monies into a bottomless pit with regards to the state-owned enterprises again. With regards to, I just need to find out or ask the question with regards to the social development grants. We know that the amount that has been given to up till March this year or next year, and everybody is talking about something will come in its place, but nobody is talking about exactly what that's going to be or the financial effects that it will have. We know that from the moment that it was given, we knew that this is something that even though the president or the minister might say that the grant will end at the end of March, it will not. It is very difficult to give something to somebody and then take it away. So we knew that it is going to continue, but still we don't see anything budgeted for that or planned for that in the future. We just hear that something will come, but we don't see figures in the medium term or in the next financial year for that. So I would like to get some clarity on what would the effect thereof be on our budget. Then just on PBO's presentation, I think it is very alarming, and I'm going to take a few things, and this is a statement, it's not a question, but it brings us to the core problem of what we're sitting here with. In PBO's presentation, they use the following words, and I'm quoting: the efficiency, effectiveness, and performance of government's key plans have been poor, and targets are unlikely to be met. With regards to land redistribution, and the fact that only 10% of land has been redistributed, they laid in front of the door of a lack of funds and of corruption. Now we know why we've got a lack of funds is because of corruption and because of cadre deployment. It also on page 14 says that government is unlikely to achieve most of the targets that have been set. So we are sitting, if you look at those few statements that I've made now, we are sitting with a government that sets all these targets and everybody listens to it and it sounds nice, but nothing happens when those targets are set. Nothing happens when those targets are not reached. There's no consequence management. So we've got a PBO stating what those problems are in this instance, and I'm glad that it is frank about that. But nothing happens. We need to have consequence management when even government does not reach their targets. If you look at this picture, it is very bleak. It is very bleak when you see that government does not reach its targets. It have been poor in the execution of their plans. To now all of a sudden expect that with a new minister and local government elections has passed and new municipal governments everywhere, that all of a sudden those targets will be reached. It won't. What you put in is what you get out. And we have said the following statement many times on this platform. You cannot, insanity is if you do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. You will not get a different result with this government. And we need to make sure that government gets hold to the promises that they make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Okam. Honorable Kaiso, please come in. Honorable Kaiso? Okay, I see you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It's a bit dark here. I have a number of questions here to ask with the FFC. My first question, Honorable Chair, is to check with the FFC. The Commission recommends government to protect the local government equitable share as it continuously decline. Will this compromise, as its continuous decline will compromise gains achieved in progressive realization of basic rights? This is not the first time that the FFC is saying this. So what do you think are the reasons for this decline, FFC, and the future growth that is reflected in the MTBPS? Is this what FFC believes will address the challenges? The second one question is that your analysis reflects that despite the positive growth prospects, economic activity in terms of real gross domestic product as at second quarter of 2021 remain at the level last experienced in the last quarter of 2017. What does this analysis tell us about the projected economic growth figures in MTBPS terms? So whilst the FFC welcomes the connected focus on growth, that is through public infrastructure investment, and we all do, FFC goes on to say that government has a poor track record of impacts and outcomes. Many of the funded infrastructure projects are characterized by cost overruns, wasteful contracting, maladministration, malicious compliance by cost and non-compliance, completion delays and poor workmanship. What would the FFC suggest could change in the approach to dealing with this, including oversight? In your recommendation, the FFC reiterates its stance on the need for the executive to report timeously on how social services are affected by slow budget growth and historical budget cuts. Can you please elaborate on this point and how this impact upon government policy and programs? Now, on PBO, I just want to ask about two. And you state that the supply side PBO structural reforms are unlikely to have impact adequate to enhance growth in the medium term. Therefore, they have to be completely complemented by the measures to stimulate demand in the economy. What informed this statement? And what are the facts you could provide to allow the committee to make a determination on this statement? And second, last one, in slide 17, you pose the question, is the review of risk in the 2021 MTBPS in line with global consensus? Well, because you go on to express in the slide your concerns in this regard. You concluded by stating that government approach to fiscal policy and risk has to take into account that public finances should support stability, resilience, and economic development. This suggests that you guarded on the ability of the MTBPS to address the matter of stability, resilience, and economic development. Please explain this statement so that we can understand. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso. Honorable Matafa, please come in.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening to yourself and the guests and all other honorable members on the platform. Chair, I am pretty much covered But I just have a few points that I maybe want to raise in a form of questions. And the first one, it can either be taken by the FFC or the PBO. It's on the unrest that we have witnessed. I know one member have already touched on that, but my question there is if whether, based on the government pronouncements ever since the unrest, is there a sense that we have identified what most commentators refer to as social ills that can be seen as triggers that would have made it so easy that most people actually joined in the criminality that took place? Having asked that, what contingency measures can we put in place to ensure that should anything of that nature happens, we are ready? Or how best can we prevent them? And I'm just wondering, should we contribute more to the contingency fund? Or is there a sense that if these triggers have been identified, we are moving in a direction that seeks to mitigate such? And I think, Chair, most commentators also referred to poverty as one of the lead causes that can be blamed for such a particular event arising in our democratic dispensation. And the PBO also speaks to issues of poverty, Chair. When we look at slide 6, they raise a concern that the MTBPS is silent on how, on whether is there relief and recovery for the poorest households or where it will come from. And in saying that, we have noted one member spoke about the raising fuel price. Food also is increasing as a result of a knock-on effect from the petrol price increase. Now, the question might be, would it be prudent to consider inflationary adjustments to the grants that are already being allocated as safety nets to the poorest of the poor, to ensure that food security and the food poverty is not experienced by those that are vulnerable? Because also, Chair, in slide 9, slide 8 rather, the PBO also reflects on the issue of acute malnutrition on children under the age of 5, which is sitting at the rate of 7.1%, a rate that is actually higher than the 5% anticipated MTSF target. Now, the question would be, what measures in the medium-term fiscal framework can be put in place to ensure that these particular rates are not worsening as time goes on? The other point, Chair, is on the issue of professionalization of the public sector. And previous speakers have spoken, and I think maybe it is because of them being in the opposition, they will also always hammer the negative aspects of the public sector, but ignore the efforts that the executive is doing. There were efforts that were being done in professionalizing the public sector in order to create a capable state. Now, I'm interested to find out if whether can the PBO say they are picking up movement towards a capable state, or are these efforts that are being implemented are actually bearing fruit? One of such measures, I remember there was an audit of skill and qualification in the public sector, which was led by Minister Mchunu. So there will be issues of the wage bill, there will be issues of cadre deployment, as they call it, but when it's done in other areas by them, it's not called that. So the question is if whether is there any indication that shows that the efforts that are being made by the executive are actually bearing fruit. The second last one, Chair, is on the government target of exiting the fiscal consolidation path by 2024. Is it realistic, considering the hardships that our economy is facing, particularly the almost zero growth and all other pressures that we are facing in the passes of the state? The last one, Chair, is on the basic income grant. And I think most commentators, and I think there's a sentiment of the PBO, they will correct me if I'm wrong, that under the current fiscal framework, the basic income grant is not sustainable. So the question there would be, what fiscal multipliers can be introduced to ensure that, be it growth or be it savings, will ensure that this important grant is not only implementable, but also sustainable in the long run? Obviously, Chair, with the view of dealing with those triggers that I've initially alluded to, that can lead to the country being stabilized as a result of opportunistic criminality that might be erupting in any part of the country. I will pause there, Chair, and thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for the presenters for the presentations that they have made to the committee. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Matafa. Chair, Honorable Mahlangu, please come in.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, members, colleagues, Team PBO and FFC. Chair, on what I'm going to say, I might be on a disadvantageous position because I was not part of the session with the finance in the morning. And my apologies, I'll not be able to switch my video on. My link is very, very, very weak. So I'm struggling with the network. But then let me start with what PBO have said, and I hope I've heard them well. When they said, I don't know if it's Miss Lian, is it Lian or Elian? My apologies for the pronunciation of your words, of your name. That there was no pronouncement as to this social relief grant. When will it end? If I heard you well, I think I disagree with you because the pronouncement was made, and we all know that it will end by March next year. So the other thing that I want to bring in, one member have said that they know that even if it was said that it will end in March, it will come again. And it's not clear. It's like maybe the government is hiding, or Treasury is hiding something, or they know something. It's unfortunate that we are not all in the advantageous position or where we know information equally. But from what I know is that Appropriations Committee is the one that has pushed, that has made it possible. As the oversight committee, we have put pressure to government, having seen the situation that is not improving, and also listening to the cries of our constituencies that let the social relief grant be continued. So we are thankful that it continued. So if it has to be continued, we need to consider, where are we going to cut? Where are we going to get money to do that? So that when we say to Treasury or to government, we would like you to continue with this, we must also look at the sustainability of this. What kind of a country do we want? Do we want a social welfare or a welfare state something that is going to be there forever. Or we should be able to say to government, this is what we think we should do to have an environment that is able to create jobs for people, so that people are having jobs and we have an economy that is sustainable and stable. Both presentations, they have identified areas of weaknesses, of concerns and stuff. What I would like probably to FFC, because you have this continuous engagement with the Treasury, all these things that we have identified, we agree with them, both presentations. But to me, it's like they are all over, because the intention of the MTBP is to reprioritize. And as we reprioritize, we need to say the focus must be here and here and here and here. You know, in terms of priority, how do we prioritize these problems or challenges that we're facing, so that we are able to guide those issues as we present them. But the conditional grant, as we always said, conditional grants must have conditions, and those are non-negotiables. So it's something that we cannot negotiate or try to amend. So people need to stick to the conditions. And once again, in every meeting, we raise the issue of the consequence management. So if there's no consequence management, people will do as they wish. There will be that laissez-faire kind of leadership or responsibility. So we don't want to see that. The last but one thing, Chair, that I want to raise is the issue. I think it was on a lighter note, and all of you have shown interest. Maybe we can talk about it one time, informally so, or as to who is the better manager. Who is the better manager? And it was introduced by Honorable Ryan. So I leave it that, and we all know who are the people who can manage better. Shengen Nyavum. And I wish she was, or she's watching. At Leme is Ilona yaki, position yaki. So Chair, I'm going to save your time and leave all other things. The issue of cadre deployment and stuff, I don't think at this point they will serve any interest on what I want to raise. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mahlangu. I think that was the end of Babalo. That's the end of questions from the honorable members. Am I correct?
No, Chairperson, I've raised my hand, shaky mom.
Okay, who else? Okay, in that order, please, Honorable Sheikh.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I know it's late in the evening, and I forgive you for not seeing me. Yeah, I have a few questions. I think,
Honorable Sheikh, it's Lubabalo who's looking at hands. He informs me. So when we took the hands, I'm sure Honorable Sheikh's hand was not there at that time. But that's fine. I always enjoy your coming in. You are welcome. We could have even extended it behind 9 o'clock if you wanted to speak.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Chair. You know, Chair, with what we've just heard, my question is to all of them. Does government ever engage all your different role players? because you're telling us a whole lot here. So the question is, does government really engage? Do you tell them what you tell us? Are they willing to listen to you? Do they listen to you? Do they take your advice and guidance or not? That's the first thing. The second thing is this. Do you believe that it is time, in order to address the socio-economic conditions of this country, that we go back to look at our policies in this country? Does it speak to the actual needs of the economy, our people, and economic growth in the country or not? So I'd like to know about that. Then I'd like you to tell us whether you can see any time in the near future, because I can't. I want to be honest with you, I can't. That we will actually separate administration from politics. Now, in principle, that's the way it's supposed to be. Do you ever see that really happening in practice? Because a lot of what is happening in this country is because we employ people, because we like them, because we know them, they're part of our party, and all the parties are responsible to do the same thing. There's no doubt about it. So, you know, the question is, do you see it coming to an end so that we could all work together in the interest of the country and put in some mechanisms so that people will be employed based on their capacity and ability to do the work? Now, you know, we talk about oversight. We have so many oversight mechanisms, right? From local government, we have internal audit, we've got the APACs and the MPACs, and we've got SCOPAs, and we've got it all. And I've heard colleague after colleague talk about consequence management. We spend a lot of money on oversight. Clearly, let us be honest, it's not working. It's just not working. What is your view on that? You know, I don't want to ask you the question I asked you last year about whether we need 3 spheres of government, because now we've gone to 4, the way I see it. And that's my view. Now, on the issue of state-owned entities, and why I'm particularly asking this is because surely the state-owned entities were there for a specific purpose. And my understanding is they can be very successful. Would you agree with me that the reason why the state-owned entities are in the state they are is because of interference and corruption? Otherwise, if they operate on business principles, they can be an asset and generate profits and income for the country. And my concern is, and maybe you need to guide me on the decision-making that takes place. And I'll give you an ideal example. We sit with state-owned entities that are costing us money year in and year out, taxpayers' money. But look at what we did. We went and sold lucrative Vodacom shares, and we sold those shares to bail out Eskom. Now, my concern is that even some of us that may have objected to it, we were voiceless, and the decisions are still being made. Now, I think, Chair, I've got so many here that I don't want to go on, but I'll just stop with the last one. You know, education for me is the key. And yet the quality of education in South Africa at the moment leaves a lot to be desired. You got a 60% dropout in the tertiary institutions, or particularly the TVET colleges, every year. So look at the amount of money that you are wasting. And yet we have a 44% unemployment rate. And then we say we've got a skills shortage in the country and an abundance of other skills. Are we still there, Chair? Because I see, I'm still here, isn't it?
I can hear you very well, and I think all the members can hear.
Are you there, Chair?
I'm there.
Oh, okay, clearly. Okay, they can hear. No, I missed your face, so I thought you left me behind, deserted me. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Now, my concern is the education. The quality of education from basic education level is low, and it's not speaking to higher education. As a result, you're having 60% dropout in the first year. And more importantly, the quality of education that they're getting are not preparing them for tertiary education. And as a result, the skills that you're getting are not good enough. At the same time, the TVET colleges and things are not speaking to each other based on the skills needs of this country. So you want to still import skills, and I keep hearing them saying we need to import skills, but we have a 44% unemployment rate in the country. Now, I just feel that, we're not talking to each other. Now, economic growth can, if you don't create jobs, you can't create economic growth, because it's the jobs that is going to bring income, that is going to cause people to spend, and the money is going to circulate in the economy. And I repeatedly hear there's a brilliant example of how our success in the automotive industry. But I see they don't want to replicate that into the other industries. You have the cheapest of imports that's coming into the country. They don't want to stop that. Everything is imported today, everything, even sweets, toilet paper as well, imported in the country. They don't want to deal with that. What is that doing? It is basically shutting down all your other industries. Now, shouldn't charity begin at home in order to create jobs and boost this economy? We should put in measures to protect our industries as well and create the jobs. But we don't want to do that. So I'm going to leave you with some of those things, and you can perhaps respond. But thank you very much, Chair, for giving me. I've got so many more here, but I don't want to take you through the early hours of tomorrow morning. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable Sheikh. Honorable Mlenzana.
Thank you, Chairperson. And I will put it the other way around, Chair. Thanks for according myself and Honorable Sheikh this opportunity after we would have been slow thinkers and decided to come in when you would have closed if you wanted to. So thanks for the opportunity.
Lister Honorable achter Oscom ook in de graal, is dat niet zo niet?
Yes, that's far, Chairperson. Chairperson, let me start by one, appreciating the presentations, both of them, and they could arm us, both FFC and the Parliamentary Budget Office would notice that, particularly myself, I deliberately used their presentations during the course of the morning when I was dealing with National Treasury. That was deliberate, Chairperson. But, some of the suggestions that they are throwing are also, probing me to answer questions from them. But before I get there, let me start with this generic one, Chairperson, on economic renewal and transformation. What is it that we could be advised by both? This question goes to both FFC and the Parliamentary Budget Office. In terms of your economic contributors, there is a lot, but now, what is it that we can pick up? I'm raising this, Chairperson, with that understanding that the medium-term budget policy speech is actually, warming ourselves up going towards the February budget speech discussions. So then, for me, if we could be armed by FFC and the Parliamentary Budget Office going towards February as to what economic contributors could be quickly put in place and implemented the soonest, such that come the time when the minister would be tabling his first budget, he would then be able to would have tested some of such contributors. The second one, Chair, I listened carefully when, was it FFC? Yes. Talking about the adjustment in the appropriation bill. Now, uncoupling this with the discussion which was started by the minister last week, and even today, you know, we were all talking about this tough love. Now, my question to both is, yes, we understand that the restructuring of SO is urgent. It is now long overdue, and it has to be prioritized. But now, the how part of it, can both FFC and the Parliamentary Budget Office advise us as to what are these action-related issues that has to be put in place, preferably with timeframes, so that we can begin to realize this restructuring of SOEs. Because the reality is that when I personally interpret what tough love means, is that we will remain loving the SOEs, and we're still going to remain with SOEs, sorry, Chairperson. But at the same time, we must have a way of some kind of a tough control, that it is not a willy-nilly kind of arrangement where whoever comes asking for a bailout will just dish out. But then they can come in. Then the last one for me, Chairperson, I don't want to be long. Also, I agree with FFC when they are talking of the reviewal of the structure of conditional grants. But also here, can we have proposals, workable proposals? We have been talking, for instance, Chairperson, of moving from the baseline approach in budgeting to the zero-based budgeting. Now, the reality is that you have to move swiftly, but it has to be orderly going towards the zero-based budget. It cannot be that you will just drop some baseline issues, because as we speak now, there would be some, what I would call, imperatives that you cannot just undo as you would wish, but you have to be smart. But now, is there a way where we could be advised on how to apportion the program going towards the realization of the zero-based budget, taking into consideration that we have been crying foul, all of us, about the allocations to provinces, and in particular the municipalities now, taking into consideration, of course, if they are able, that we would like to realize the district development model in place, particularly this time around, and if possible, as I was saying, Chairperson, between now and February, so that if we can see that the DDM model is actually working, then we can begin to say, pump in money where it is needed most, but where it will be used expediently. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you so much, honorable members. I also had a lot of questions, but I am going to bank them for future interaction. But let me add on one of the issues raised by the honorable member. I think it was Honorable Sheikh. FFC and PBO, you do come to us and give us these very intelligent advices, which we appreciate, and doing that is a way of appreciating the issues that you have raised. You may not agree with all of them. We've got our own views on them, but I think they are based on research from yourselves too. So we accept that. But I just wanted to check, when you have got professional and intellectual engagements with National Treasury, for instance, how would you evaluate that interaction? Do you think there is value in it? Are there things that they consider, or they are able also to convince you and try and reach some agreement on certain things? I'm saying that knowing fully well about their responsibility and your responsibilities. That's one. Honorable members, there's one thing which I don't know how we're going to deal with it, but I would also like to hear both PPO and FFC. The inability of departments to spend money. There was a debate this afternoon in Parliament, for instance, where it came out that there's so much underspending in the EPWP by the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. Now, we are saying we're spending on infrastructure this side, we are creating employment schemes this side, but there's a budget that is already there, but there's gross underspending. So I want to check what do you make out of that? Obviously, the economics of it can't be right in a number of ways, but perhaps the question is, what do you attribute that to, and what can be done? I'm using Department of Public Works and Infrastructure because it was a debate in Parliament today, and the figures there, and National Treasury will be coming with the, I think it's a third quarter performance or second quarter performance, I'm not sure, honorable members, but they'll be coming to us and you'll be seeing gross underspending. And we keep on receiving these reports, and what do we do about them? Because departments never fail to get excuses. I don't call it reasons, excuses of not spending money, but I just want to hear your take on that. And then my last one, the change of policy, for instance, by the Department of Human Settlement from housing provision to the provision of service sites. What would you know perhaps the unintended consequences of this change of direction? And I'm sure even in other departments, but one is making the example of human settlements. And FFC, you'll start and be economic with your answers, but again, don't run away from the questions that we have asked. If you can't answer them now, I'm one person who don't want convenient answers. If you say you still want to check on this one, please be brave, but please follow up and provide those answers to the honorable members. Yes, so we'll start with FFC. You pick what was directed to you, and then PPO will follow. Let's see how far. Please, let's be very economic. Take 15 minutes, FFC, and see how far you go.
Okay, thank you so much, Chairperson and the members, for those extensive questions and the engagement with our presentations. Won't take up much time. I just want to synthesize the questions that were asked for the benefit of my team, Chairperson. There was a question which was asked by Honorable Dutoy. He asked about
Dr. Mbava.
Yes.
Please don't repeat questions. I think just say if you wanted to say sorry and so take the question. Let's not repeat questions. Yeah.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you so much. Chairperson, I think there's a question as well that I wanted to answer from Honorable Okam. He asked whether our recommendations are actually taken up by government, and whether those recommendations are influential. So on our side, Chairperson, we know that we have a clear mandate, and we know that our role is to advise government on fiscal and financial matters, as well as on the division of revenue. So we aim at all times to ensure that our research is evidence-based, that it is well researched, and that it is cogent, in the sense that we are not influenced by the perceptions in the media or popular media, but we present research that is evidence-based and we can only present the facts. And that is my response with regards to that. And then, Chairperson, you also ask a question as well as to whether our recommendations, are they, or rather, I think the question you asked was, how is the engagement with National Treasury when it comes to our recommendations? And how do we go about making sure that government takes those recommendations into planning? I think it's the same question as well, which was asked by Honorable Sheikh. He wanted to find out, does government listen to us as the FFC? So we aim to provide recommendations to government on an annual basis. And those recommendations are well researched. Now, when it comes to engagement with the National Treasury, the important thing is to ensure that our recommendations find expression in the budget. They find expression in the division of revenue, but that is not only what we aim for, because if you only look at our recommendation through the narrow lens of the division of revenue, then we are not actually fully implementing the entire mandate of the FFC. The FFC's mandate goes purely beyond just the division of revenue. We also advise government on financial and fiscal matters as well. So the question is that, are those other matters taken up? If those other matters are not necessarily aligned to the division of revenue, where are those recommendations going? Does government adopt those recommendations? I think that is the answer that we are also wanting to answer internally as well, along with National Treasury. So without going further, Chairperson, I have on the platform Commissioner Erasmus, and I also have Commissioner Sachs, who can take some of the questions as well. And I have the Head of Research, Chen, who can take the questions. And I have Mkhululi and Sianda. So I want to hand over to them in that order: Erasmus, Sachs, Chen, Mkhululi, and Sianda. Please answer any of these questions as best as you can. I'm sure you've taken notes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mbava, and good evening, Chair and honorable members. In connection with Honorable Ryder's question on the risks, the FFC has identified risks on debt servicing cost, the public sector wage bill, inefficient government spending. Either the rate at which the debt grows is still faster than what the economy grows because of the interest rate being higher than the GDP growth. So we therefore cannot only, save our way out of this debt by reducing, the wage bill and be more efficient with our public spending. But we certainly cannot also stop spending. We simply need to continue with development initiatives, narrowing inequality and easing the suffering of the most vulnerable in society. Thus, we need to increase government spending, and it must be funded from the fiscus. So where to go from here? We need to grow the economy. Speaking about earlier, one of the honorable members about the social instability, I think it was Honorable Sheikh. We cannot afford social instability and think the environment will be conducive for large-scale investment. So we need investor confidence. And, with investor confidence, the government should implement economic reforms that can unlock private sector investment and create jobs. Mr. Edgar Sishi from National Treasury this morning admitted that private sector confidence is low. So the question in that is, what is to be done to restore this investor confidence? Government policy must explicitly promote business in South Africa, and it's something that government admits it's doing. And the Deputy Minister has indeed named several examples of how it's being pursued. However, low investor confidence can be increased not only by properly implementing the structural reforms that we see from the medium-term budget, but also by creating policy certainty on several issues that concerns investors. Yet we also have to have a look at our public spending, our quality of expenditure, and wherever we spend our public funds, we need to enhance economic growth. We need to get that value for money public spending. And coming to the last honourable members' questions on, how are we going to make immediate impact with regards to the February budget coming, we need to have a look at the current tender system. It's fraught with problems. It needs to be addressed. And then at the end of the day, there's no amount of regulation that can make a difference if the values of civil servants are not geared towards productivity, the rendering of effective services to all South Africans, which of course has bearing between that division between state and party, which was also called upon. Thank you.
Chair, in the interest of time, I think I would want to hand over directly to the Head of Research, Chen. Thanks. That's from Deputy Chair of FFC SACS.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Let me do this. I just want to put forward two very important concepts. And this all, I think, one way or another relates to why we have low growth and or the way forward for growth. And it's this, very important. First is that we need to watch out for what is called in economics, obviously, the crowding out effect. And second concept, I shan't do the Wikipedia now, but second concept is the way we understand the problem of growth in facing South Africa is whether it is supply side problem or the demand side problem. Now, and I will present facts, but if you believe that it is a demand side problem, then sure, spend away. But if you believe that it is, or evidence is, it would suggest that it is a supply side problem, then you would want structural transformation, because it's about the structure of the production function and the efficiency, the productivity of the production function. Now, let me just put forward the facts. From 2007, right, our government spending as a percentage of GDP was 17%, okay, of GDP. By 2020, that is 22.5%. So we have been spending, all right, maybe it's because of COVID. So 2019, we were at 21% of GDP, our government expenditure. So we have tried the demand side problem or the method of trying to stimulate growth. And that has clearly not provided any evidence in terms of growth, because you'll remember, Honorable Chair, and members, that we entered into this long slowdown, or the great long slowdown that in our economic growth. Honorable Chair, with those two comments, I dare not sort of forgo your very important points and questions. Inability to spend on the EPWP, I think this one is quite important because it also speaks to the overall infrastructure management deficiencies. Governments, I think, and also again with facts, is, and I would look for an alternative, but how are we doing with infrastructure? Government is not really good at actually infrastructure delivery, right? Most of its projects and service deliveries are either, depending on which sphere of government, but even I say in local government where it's closest to the people, to the people's needs, generally it's done through service providers. And that creates its own sets of prices in the market. And again, it crowds out the market participants in that sense, that you have basically let's all just take on government money to do very expensive projects, and there is no competition there in because the efficiency is already crowded out. No one else wants to participate. And also evaluating our interaction with National Treasury, and to do with that also consequence management. Honorable Chair members, I think there are many ways that we have already said, and also through years of engagement, is that the structure is like oversight over the executive and executive over the administrative. But time and time again, it's always that it takes so long for either one of the three to just make the decision, take decisive action against whichever one that is supposed to hold to be held to account. So with that, Chair, let me stop there, and hopefully we will get another chance. Of course, hopefully on the 23rd when we engage you again. Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure if Kululi or Sianda or Tando has any comments. If not, it's okay. Then we can hand over back to the chairperson.
Thanks. I have no. Sorry, I have no comments.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there is no comment from my side except to say that I think the point that it's a growth problem or a debt problem. I think it's both. We have both a debt and a growth problem, and in addressing that, we need to think of them as problems that have a potential to reinforce each other, so that we are able to address them successfully. So that is my comment, that it's both a debt and a growth problem.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. Chairperson of the committee, can I hand over back to you?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbawa. Dr. Janchis, with your team, please come in. You were well within your time, Team FFC. PBO, please come in. 15 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairperson. I think the issue of time is really stressful because we rushed through our presentation, and certainly
Dr. Janchis, please get to the answers. You see, that introduction is eating on your time.
Thank you, Chairperson. No, the point I'm making is
I know you work with us politicians. That's us who have got long. Get to the answer.
The point is that, Chairperson, members missed our message where it seemed as if we said contrary information, whereas we said certain information. When you look at some of the risks that we've set out, there's so many risks. But in any case, I'll give the team to respond to some of the point. But I think I'll make 2 points, Chairperson. I think earlier in the year, one of the reports that we made for the committees was around the issue of economic growth and economic development. I think what we emphasized there was the issue of really economic transformation as one of the factors that really moving away the economy, or fiscal policy being used to support the more productive sector, and we emphasize the importance of industrialization as a one way really over the long term. It has to come quite strongly from the fiscal policy in a way of really shifting, spending or shifting support to the economy more towards productive sector. And I think that's the point what we're trying to emphasize in our presentation. And the second point, which will also raise a lot of risks that we raised, as members highlighted there. But I think the issue of support for social relief and support for low household, it's an important point, and it should not really be seen as not important, because it should be seen as complementary towards supporting economic development over the medium term, because the stability in household, stability in social stability, which will be brought by support for low-income households, should really be seen as broadly part of bringing stability, which is part of fiscal, should be seen as part of fiscal policy stability. The point on engagement with government, we have certainly put out the requests, and we are still waiting to discuss some of these issues with the government. I think I'll stop there. I'll give Dr. Nelia and Dr. Mohammed to come in this regard. Nelia, do you want to come in?
Yes. Thank you, Director. I think I'll start with Honorable Ryder. Honorable Ryder, the message that we actually just wanted to transfer to you is in terms of the SOEs and the contingent liability, is we still have a contingent liability, although lower. This year we had a contingent liability of 12 billion. Over the medium term, it's only 5. But this year, for the first time, there's an additional line item in the budget, which is an unallocated reserve. And that reserve over the medium term is for the 22 budget year, 15.1 billion, 28.8 billion, and 29. There's some interference on the, but anyway.
Sorry, Dr. Onandi. I'm sure members will mute.
So that is what we're basically saying, is that the government is saying we're not going to allocate additional funds for SOEs, but they still provided an unallocated reserve, which is quite high. And as I said, it's 15.1, 28.8, 29.3 billion over the medium term. And this is in addition to the contingency reserve. So in my mind, they actually indirectly did make provision for needs that might come up over the medium term in terms of SOEs or other disasters. But the current payments of financial assets for SOEs is basically just that's provided for Eskom. And then Honorable Oukamp, everybody is just talking about the high COE budget. But to me, it's the reduction in COE budgets should be targeted. As you said, if there are people that is redundant, they must rather target those people and get rid of them, or to reduce the COE budget. But we cannot take away from health and education, because you could see the implications of that. We don't reach our targets. We don't have educators that can educate our children and provide them with skills on maths and science. And that is what we want. We want the children to pass maths and science. It's very low at this stage. And it's because of that fact that we need to import skills. And also in the beginning, you know, I'm concerned with policy, and it's my passion, policy implementation, and to make sure that we have quality policies in government. And that they are included in the budget process. So in the beginning, we basically said that we found that spending priorities being considered for the 2022 MTFF, and these are things that has been identified by the departments. This is our spending priorities. They are so incoherent, you don't really know what they are going to do. For basic education, they said more policy decisions need to bring compensation spending in line with available resources. That's not a spending priority. They still want to discuss and talk about it. Should the priority not be that we need to make sure that we recover all this lost time of our kids in terms of the lockdown? The same with health. They're saying we're still discussion, the respond to the future waves. At this stage, we can't still discuss because there are 900 million in the budget to be spent on on COVID-19. So we need to know where we're going to allocate that budget and for what we're going to use that budget. And the same with the interns, the medical interns. For months they were not placed because they didn't have had money to pay for them. We cannot take COE money away from health and then have all these qualified, almost qualified doctors that we can't place in hospitals. The same with social development. They just said, we are still going to do research to see how we're going to replace or improve the social grants. That's not what we want to see in the MTBPS. We want to see something concrete. What are we going to do? Are we going to restructure the grant system, or are we going to add to the conditional grant system? Honorable Mafasa, the same with the malnutrition issue. Does our people on the ground really know what the priorities are, and are they doing their job? We have so many home-based carers. We have so many additional social workers, especially now with the additional money that we allocated. Why don't they identify those babies, those under 5-year-olds that are malnourished? It's about management, and it's about people that needs to know what their responsibilities are or should be. And then in terms of Honorable Buthelez, you said there was a long discussion about the EPWP. That's exactly the point that I also wanted to bring over, is that we allocated all these additional funds for job creation, but we already have EPWP in place, and EPWP is not performing. Have we really went through a troubleshooting exercise to know why the EPWP program is not working? Because we've got a huge EPWP budget for all the sectors. We got it for ECD, we've got it for other social services, we've got it for environment, we've got it for health, especially for home-based carers, we've got it for public works, but then they don't perform. We still give additional money, and for all those sectors, we also have conditional grants, and each and every conditional grant has got a section that they have to create jobs. And most of those jobs that they create are also funded through the EPWP. So there's such a lot of duplication now in terms of job creation. That's why EPWP cannot perform, because now we add money. So we add money. I was thinking in terms of all these, the point that we want to make in terms of reprioritization. So we add this money to create jobs. So we actually then departments free up money that they were supposed to do, and they reprioritize them. It's almost like trade-offs that they make themselves just because they get additional money. Yes, I think we will get another opportunity also to talk about this. And members, the one question that I also didn't answer is, we did this pre-MTBPS report, and we've got a lot of detail in that report in terms of the biannual report on the targets that has been achieved and the ones that has not been achieved. And we also plan a new project to talk about all these targets that has not been achieved. In terms of the ethical state, most of those targets have been achieved, but it's also debatable whether those indicators are the correct indicators. The ones that we haven't achieved in terms of the ethical states is basically on the audit outcomes. Those are the ones that we haven't achieved, but most of the others we have achieved in priority 1. There was something else that I said, but I think I should give Sirosa an opportunity. The last thing that I wanted to say about the conditional grant reports that we did. We did a whole series of conditional grant reports, and we really identified a lot of issues in terms of those conditional grants, in terms of duplication, in terms of the poor reporting, in terms of different provinces reporting differently, in terms of conditional grants. In most of the grants, the no targets has been set, and departments or sectors just report on the outputs. So there's definitely a need to look at the structure of the conditional grant, their business plans, the schedules to the Division of Revenue, because the reporting is also very bad. One of the examples that I can give is in terms of transport. The reporting in the annual report of the Department of Transport was a total different numbers that we found than what was in the 2021 Division of Revenue Board. So the information was totally incomplete. But we will still send out the last one, the analysis that we did on the transport conditional grant. So I'll hand over to Siraj. Thank you, honorable members.
Thank you, Nelia. With your permission, Honorable Chair, may I proceed?
Please, Dr. Siraj.
Thank you very much. The first question was, how far are we over the fiscal cliff? And I think this is the issue that comes up all the time. Mr. Sishi from National Treasury spoke about crowding out. Unfortunately, I see FFC is also talking about crowding out. And this whole idea of debt and debt being intolerable and too high. I think we really need to start thinking about this discussion, and it's easy to say that what you're putting forward is evidence-based. If you throw in a few numbers and you don't contextualize those numbers, it's actually a problem, but it's also about how you interpret and what kind of economic perspective you use. And so one of the things we're doing in this report is to say, well, what are the risks in the economy? And high debt and high debt service costs may be a risk, but the risks are also about political, economic, and social stability, the stability of household finances, and the need to secure those as a way to ensure that we don't have repeats of what happened in July, but also if we look at the ongoing damage of the frequent and sometimes violent protests in communities, local government protests, service delivery protests, those kinds of things, and the need to actually provide proper kind of basic services. So this issue of debt, but there's also about what you use the debt for. And so we can say, well, our interest rates are higher than our growth rates, and so we're always going to have more debt and growing debt. But the issue then is, how do we grow the economy? And one of the really important ways to grow the economy, and here I actually think that the FFC needs to think past simplistic views, and I'm glad that the director of the PBO spoke about the previous work that we've done for committees on the structural economic problems, is to recognize the problems on the supply side and the problems on the demand side, and that a lot of the problems in South Africa are structural on the supply side. And the South African economy is a hugely concentrated economy. We've had deindustrialization since the 1980s. We've had growth in services, particularly finance, and we're seeing that even with more credit being extended to the private sector, a jump to about 10% in the period leading up to the global financial crisis, and it stayed at that level, but we actually saw investment levels staying low. And so this question about whether government is crowding out private sector investment, we actually have the South African Reserve Bank governor telling us that the private sector is sitting on money and they're not investing, and talking about measures to how to get them to it. So the issue of crowding out is a red herring. It's not something that we should actually consider seriously, I would argue. And we need to think then, what do we do to shift money out of finances and financial assets into productive sectors. And here, this is where the demand side is really important, and why we argue that the structural reforms aren't enough, because the structural reforms don't take enough account of the problems in the structure of the economy. And one way to actually shift the South African economic growth path is to put money into the hands of the poorest households, possibly through increasing social grants, and also a basic income grant, as a way to shift where demand comes and the demand for what kind of goods, and an increased demand for goods from the productive sector that are more labor intensive and less energy and capital intensive. And also, as Honorable Sheikh Imam spoke about, will support local industry and local manufacturing and local businesses, and to make sure that more of that is local. So we need to be really careful about thinking through and understanding the economy as a whole. The other thing about debt and government spending is about 20% of GDP. Household spending is about 60% of GDP. Investment, unfortunately, has been under 20% of GDP, but a significant share of that investment comes from SOEs and government. So we can't discount the impact of government consumption and government capital expenditure from SO and public sector capital expenditure from SOEs, even if a lot of that may have been problems with corruption and wasteful expenditure, but that money goes into the economy. This view of seeing crowding out and thinking about things in terms of simple supply and demand side doesn't see the economy as actually a dynamic being with a relationship between the supply and demand. When government borrows and spends, that money goes to the private sector, increases their profits, and probably increases their likelihood to invest and to create employment. One of the big problems is that there hasn't actually been adequate enough productive investment from the private sector. And that's where we need structural reforms and demand side management issues, whether it's promoting exports or whether it's linked to putting more money to the hands of poor households. That's where we need to actually shift and move onto a different kind of economic growth path, one that is less driven by finance and financialization. So this issue of debt and how far we are on the fiscal cliff, it's something that I don't think is taking us very far in thinking about how do we improve the economy, how do we create the jobs that deal with unemployment and can actually start shifting inequality. The link to that, I'm just going to answer one more question. I know that it's late and that people are tired and we've spoken a lot. There was a question from, I think it was Honorable Kaiso, about what evidence does the PBO have that supply side structural problems are limited by aggregate demand in the economy. One of the huge amounts of sources for this in the international literature. I mean, one paper that I actually point to quite a bit is one by Danny Roderick, who was part of the Harvard team that supported the National Treasury in 2007 or 8 with their strategies and approach. And he actually raises the issue that a lot of countries have moved and are trying to implement structural reforms, but the experience is showing, and the experience has shown, and he actually refers to the structural adjustment programs imposed by the IMF and the World Bank on Africa as having all the elements of these structural reforms, and he shows that they take a really long time to work, and sometimes the returns from that, when they do work in the long term, aren't big enough to offset the damage that they could possibly cause in the short term because of the disruption and also because of the costs with implementing them. And so what we actually raised in our presentation is this question of, can National Treasury say to us, are these structural reforms in the absence of actually enough demand side demand, are they actually not going to end up not damaging the economy? And we haven't seen evidence-based issues to back that up. So I'm going to stop there, and if there are any other questions that I've forgotten about, hopefully we can come to that in the future. Thank you very much, Honourable.
Chairperson, I think we'll stop there, and then any outstanding questions we can respond to them in writing, and the committee secretariat can send them to us, Chairperson. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Dr. Janchis and your team, thank you very much. Dr. Mbava and your team, thank you very much. But before I let you go, let me check with Honorable Mashang. Anything from your side? Okay, I know she's having a problem of connectivity, but thank you very much, honorable members, for this engagement. Two things as I conclude the meeting, which I think it's a challenge to us, honorable members, that in most cases the debates that we're having even from departments is more money and more money and more money. But issues which are raised here point more to other things which make us not able to achieve what we are trying to achieve, despite the appropriations that we make to departments, to provinces, and to local governments. So I don't think we spent time in trying to understand exactly what is happening. We tend to be very superficial in some of our responses, and we miss the point. So I'm talking about us, honorable members. I'll make a point, a popular one, the cadre deployment. We like branding that one around, but just to share with the honorable members, I've said in many interviews whilst was still on the executive, including the interview which appointed the DG of the National Treasury and some of the DDGs who interact with you on a daily basis, but in other departments too. I don't remember a single one where I would ask somebody of his political affiliation. I think they would have come out by now, those who lost out, that I got into the interview and I didn't succeed because I was asked my political affiliation. So I'm just saying they may be there in some instances, but I'm just saying that it's some of the issues that when we talk about why things don't happen, there is easy answers that we tend to gravitate to. But having said that, I'm saying perhaps in the bigger scheme, there are experiences that don't say that it's not happening, but I'm just saying that there are deeper issues here, that the budget is not being used, there are duplications and so on. And Dr. Oland, I think it would be good, it will also help the other members that they have sight of some of those things where there's under expenditure, there's duplications, the conditional grants, so that we get deeper to why things are happening. And where I'll agree with members, I think now it's about, in the current administration, about 2.5 years in the administration. And we raise issues, and in some instances, we don't see change, or there's very little change in the behavior. So if we are not careful, it ends up being a tick box exercise. We are here until this time and so on, which means that we take our duties and the responsibility given to us by South Africans very seriously. But having done that, we don't see improved deliverables on the other side. So I think as oral members, we do need to look into that, because if the economy is growing, if our people are not being employed, if inequality increases, there is not a single oral member, I will bet my last dime, would say he wants or she wants to see that outcome. So it affects us all. So there's definitely alignment, irrespective of political parties, when it comes to that. So the point that I make, remember, is that perhaps going forward, collectively and in our individual committees, we need to drive a little bit deeper in understanding, but not just understanding. We all say consequence management, but do we really follow up on that, and what are we supposed to do? I know as finance committees, we can't do all of these things, but again, what do we do to also ensure that other oral members in other committees, they deal with these things? Because we've got this advantage that we have got a helicopter view of all the departments. Other departments don't, other committees, they don't have that luxury. But with those concluding remarks from my side, again, let me thank you, honorable members. It has been a very long day, and your being here is highly appreciated. Thank you, chairs of committees who are here. Thank you, PBO. Thank you, FFC, our support staff, members of the media who are on the platform, and everybody who was able to join us. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. The meeting is adjourned.
Chairperson, now the meeting is adjourned, but on a lighter note, there is a day when you shall have to take us through on what is it that we mean by a cadre, and what is it that we mean by development and deployment. Ngathi khona abantu abazikhwazela nje into abangayazi babakhwaza ntoni. Bye-bye, ulale kakuhle sihlalo.
Good night, honorable members.
Good night, Chair. Thank you very much.
Oh, Honorable Masonganye, sorry, I didn't recognize you. Thank you so much.
Okay, boss.
Okay. Uzoyithola njani sisekhoneni? Honorable Sheikh, thank you. Honorable members, thank you so much.
Good night, Chair.
Good night, Honorable Mahlangu.